that will be presented to the General Conference in February 2019. One plan is called the traditional plan, traditionalist, which is basically a plan to enforce the rules we already have. And what it does is it closes some loopholes in the discipline, and it provides additional layers of accountability for people who violate the discipline. And I mean, I think the thing that probably sets it apart from proposals that have come before is it makes it possible for the denomination to remove not just clergy, but churches or entire annual conferences that position themselves as disobedient or non-compliant with the Book of Discipline as it stands. So for example, if the Baltimore, Washington annual conference passes a resolution of non-compliance as they have before, to say we simply are not going to consider criteria of sexuality, sexual orientation, or lifestyle in terms of ordination candidates, it would be possible denominationally to remove that entire annual conference. And they would become what's called a where's that word I'm looking for? It is I'll think of it in a minute. But it's called an autonomous affiliate conference. And like Puerto Rico, for example, is an autonomous affiliate conference. That it has some relationship to the United Methodist Church, but it is not United Methodist. And then the amount of money that these conferences received from the General Conference or from general boards or agencies would change along with their capacity to call themselves United Methodist and to use the cross and flame logo. And I think that would probably be enforced by the General Commission on Finance Administration. So the traditionalist plan, in a nutshell, is keep the same rules we have, but make sure that they're followed. And that will be pretty ugly when it happens. I think that's probably the most likely to pass. I'm not positive though. I've lived long enough never to make predictions about these things anymore. The next plan is called, ironically, the One Church Plan. This is a plan cooked up by Adam Hamilton with some of the Council of Bishops. It used to be called the Local Option until they decided to rebrand it as the One Church Plan. And basically what it does is it allows every church and every annual conference to make decisions, their own decisions, around human sexual ethics. So for example, were this to pass and then it would really actually only have to be a small minority of people within this church decided that they wanted to take a vote as a church on whether or not to accept gay clergy or to perform gay weddings in this building, then the church would have to vote on it, and we would have to debate these issues in the church. Having been at this church for almost 13 years now, I can tell you that would probably destroy this church and a lot of other churches within United Methodism. That's the major reason I've been a very vocal opponent of the One Church Plan, although some good friends of mine really support it. But I don't see the rationale behind taking the fight that occurs every 4 years at General Conference, which is really nasty, and bringing it to the level of the local church. I also don't see how we remain a church if we don't have consistent ethical teachings throughout the body. And I've asked these questions a lot of times, and the bishops are not interested in answering them. So I guess they will just remain unanswered. It's a very pragmatic solution, but I don't understand. I mean, either they must be seeing something I'm missing in this plan, because to me this just looks like an unmitigated disaster. Unless you're in some place like, you know, parts of the Western jurisdiction, where you'll have whole churches that are univocally progressive, or you're in Africa where you'll have whole churches that are univocally conservative. Except for those places, this will take a huge toll on our churches. The final plan is called the Connexual Conference Plan, and it basically divides us up into two mini churches. One church that has a liberalized vision of sexual ethics related to homosexuality, and one that holds to the traditional vision of sexual ethics around homosexuality. The United Methodist Church is currently divided up into jurisdictions, which was we started that in 1939, actually, when we were still just the Methodist Episcopal Church. It turned out to be a very bad decision. But our jurisdictions right now are geographical. So we reside within the North Central jurisdiction. The jurisdictions also function kind of like ideological ghettos. And so, for example, the Southeast jurisdiction tends to be much more conservative. The Western jurisdiction, Northeast jurisdiction tend to be extremely progressive. And what this would do is it would remove geographical distinctions, and it would turn us in, and it would basically establish ideological jurisdictions. Now, my friend Chris Ritter has a website called People Need Jesus. And on this website, he has an ongoing kind of compendium of helpful resources related to our current disputes within United Methodism. So if you want to find that, it's actually the only exhaustive list I know of, and it's very helpful. Chris knows more about this stuff than anybody I know. But those are the three plans that are on the table, and I think that all three of the plans that are on the table. Now, let me say one more thing about the Connexual Conference Plan, is that I think it has almost no chance of passing. The reason I think that is that it would require amendments to the Constitution of the United Methodist Church. And that means that every annual conference has to vote on these amendments, and they have to pass with, do you remember, John, what it is to pass a constitutional amendment?
Well, it's 2/3 majority instead of simple.
Yeah. And so you'd have to not only get 2/3 majority at the General Conference, but then you'd have to get 2/3 of the annual conferences to vote on this, and that's almost impossible. Now we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place on this, because right now about 33% of the voting delegates are from Africa. Africans tend to vote very conservatively on matters of human sexual ethics. And the Africans don't want to liberalize our sexual ethics. The Africans also don't want to split the church. They like being United Methodists. And so I'm not quite sure how they're going to vote on any of this. By 2028, the denomination will be majority African. It could be sooner than that if the North American church splits. And at that point, it's over. Whatever, if the denomination liberalizes its policies in 2019 or 2020, the Africans will just reverse that in 2028 when they have a majority. So, the danger for all of our churches right now is that it's very likely that there'll be some type of division within United Methodism within the next 2 years. Because if the one church plan passes, a lot of the conservative churches will leave the Wesleyan Covenant Association, and I, just for full disclosure, I'm on the board of, governing council of the Wesleyan Governing Association has already said that the local option, the one church plan, is an acceptable option. And so a number of those churches will leave the denomination, and those are some of our larger churches at that point, and incorporate under new denomination. If the traditional model passes, it will also involve a split of sorts, because it will involve removing entire annual conferences that are non-compliant. And the Connectional Conference Plan is a split. It's just by a different name. We're just continuing to cooperate on some things. Every time I talk about this someplace, I feel like I'm giving a very grim picture of what's coming. And I don't want to paint too grim a picture, but I just want to be a realist about the depth of dysfunction that is besetting our denomination. It is very serious. Our Council of Bishops has completely failed us. And we find ourselves now at a point where parts of the church probably won't be able to live together anymore.
Can you speak to the exit ramp in the traditionalist plan?
Yeah, and it's not just the traditionalists now. There was a website that just came out today for people from West Ohio, actually. Some of the same people that were arguing vehemently in 2016 for unity have now asked for an exit ramp because they think the traditionalists are going to win at General Conference. And so basically what that means is that whatever plan passes, churches and clergy would have the opportunity to leave the denomination. That's something that traditionalists are really pushing for. More and more you see progressives pushing for it too. The question on all of these is whether all of these issues have to go before the Supreme Court of United Methodism, which is called the Judicial Council. And the Judicial Council is going to have to decide if any or all of these plans are constitutional, if they are consistent with the Constitution of the United Methodist Church. And I suspect that the one church plan is not, but I'm not sure about that.
What do you see happening?
So, I'm reticent to make predictions because I've been wrong so many times.
You got a better handle on it than we do.
I just had the opportunity to be with about 60 or 70 delegates in Kenya, in Nairobi. And all of them African. And there's just no way they're going to vote to liberalize the denomination. It's not conceivable for them. Now, there's one African bishop who may have flipped on us. And African delegates tend to vote the way that their bishops tell them to. It's a much more authoritarian system than we have. But I don't think on this they will, even if their bishop votes. And so I think what's going to happen is that the traditionalist plan will pass, or that it will look like it's going to pass. And then one of two things happens. Either it passes and all pandemonium begins to happen, or a group of radicalized progressives gets wind that it's going to pass and they shut down the General Conference, which has happened on numerous occasions before, in protest. And a number of the bishops are with them and they will not restore order. Now, this General Conference is slated for 4 days. That's very short for a General Conference. It usually lasts 2 weeks. And we'll spend the first day and a half probably debating the rules. And then at that point, the clock's going to be ticking. At about, usually general conference costs around $1,200 a minute. And if we don't get something passed by the time that's over, then the can will get kicked again to 2020, at which point a number of conservative churches will just say, I've had enough, I'm leaving. Probably by March 1st, the Wesleyan Covenant Association, my guess, no one's told me this, okay, so I'm not giving you insider information, but my guess is that it will incorporate as a denomination shortly thereafter, and then churches that want to leave will simply leave. And the annual conferences will not have enough money. We're not Episcopalians, we don't have enough money to sue all of our churches and make sure they stay in the denomination. Denominations that have adopted a local option have tended to increase their rate of decline. The ELCA and the PCUSA and the Episcopal Church all did this. And what's happened in these denominations